Steven Osborne, welcome to Beyond Stage Fright. Now, you're widely considered to be one of the great pianists of your generation, and your playing has been described as having unshowy brilliance, integrity, and profound musical intelligence. You perform at most of the major musical venues around the world, and your recitals are known for their wide repertoire and their carefully crafted programmes. You've won many awards for your recordings, including 2 Gramophone Awards. And you've also spoken very openly about your experience of performance anxiety. So is performance anxiety something that you deal with on a regular basis?
I've had a bit of a Jekyll and Hyde relationship with it, really. I mean, for the big majority of my playing career, I've really loved performing. But there's been these patches in the middle where I've had quite severe anxiety, which have tended to come out of the blue. I've had sort of maybe 3 of these really over my career. The first was a sudden great preoccupation with worrying about forgetting things, and there was a period when I became obsessed with wrong notes somehow, and sort of thinking little wrong notes were going to be somehow catastrophic to the effect of the whole. And it's been quite hard to make sense of for me because my basic experience is of loving being on stage, of loving the experience of making music. So I've done a lot of thinking over the years, trying to get sort of underneath the surface of what's going on. The feeling that people often have about anxiety is that, firstly, it's very, very unpleasant. You want to get rid of it. And you sort of think that when you get rid of it, great, things will be fine. I think it's a big missed opportunity to look at it that way, because being a musician or any kind of artist, you're reliant on your emotions. What you are doing is giving an emotional experience to an audience, and in this anxiety, you could say, is an extremely rich potential of emotion if you were able to assimilate it. That's much easier said than done. This can help me to open up and help me to have more to say to the audience. There's all kinds of things really that have helped along the way. Firstly, just how very common it is. A lot of people don't speak about it, but enough do. And even you can tell the signs from watching people on stage often. You can feel this kind of paranoia, let's say. This sort of overweening kind of fear that something's going to go wrong, which is completely out of proportion to the actual situation. So I think there's so much of that we can think, actually, in a way, it's normal. That it's really not some weird aberration. And I think as a starting point, that's quite helpful to think, well, I'm not some freak. And that in some way, this makes sense. It might seem a complete overreaction, but in some way, there's an internal logic that if I were able to tap into this would gradually release itself. And over the years, I found that gradually happening, bit by bit. It was a very slow process.
And what's contributed to that? What have you actually done? Have you done sort of concrete things?
A number of things. The one thing which has helped me most has simply been doing a lot of writing. Writing a kind of stream of consciousness where, let's say, I'm nervous before a concert. The first thing I do normally is have a long bath. Like a really hot bath, and which I really love and I find very relaxing. And then I'll sort of talk to myself. I'll say out loud what I'm thinking, which is normally all kinds of dumb, paranoid stuff. Like I'm terrified I'm going to forget this bit, or I think it might fall apart, or the most paranoid stuff, the stuff that makes least sense, because that's the stuff that has the real emotion behind it. And I tend to find that as I do that, either this kind of talking out loud, or if I'm not having a bath and sort of writing a stream of consciousness, that just expressing those paranoid things can take away some of their force. And in time, like it might take 30 minutes, an hour or so, quite often I find that I move from being in this rather attacking relationship to myself to being much more compassionate. And you could think that in that experience of anxiety, one could have a lot of compassion for oneself and think, this is really horrible to go through. But what we tend to do is tell ourselves how stupid we are, which only makes it worse.
Do you think that's part of the problem, that the nerves come from this kind of inner critical voice that just has a go at us? Do you think that's where a lot of this comes from?
I mean, I think one can't speak generally. I have no idea. I mean, I can speak for myself, and I do sort of get a sense that there is rather common things among people that, in performing, the anxieties about performing. Even, some study of people's fears famously found that public speaking was the highest fear above dying. I think the methodology of that study was questioned, but still, there's some, I don't know if it's a fear of humiliation perhaps, or whatever it is, but to me it just suggests that we're much less rational than we like to think. You see a kid having a tantrum, and let's say it's not your kid, and you might sort of slightly laugh or something, oh, look at that sort of immature person, they can't cope with their emotions, but actually, I think adults have a lot of this ungovernable emotion that we struggle in various ways to cope with, and performance anxiety is a clear example of it. You could say addictions are another. You could almost say falling in love is another. I mean, what's rational about that? This sort of complete overturning of your world. It helps a bit, again, to think that it's not some weird aberration, just that we're driven by profound forces in us that we don't necessarily understand.
What are your feelings about beta blockers?
I mean, I feel about them a bit like I feel about cognitive behavioural therapy, which is another common way it's used to address this, which is that I think they can be useful in the short term, but I don't see it as a long-term solution. I've never used beta blockers myself, but I know people that have. I know people that it's helped, but it seems to me that both of those. I mean, I don't know so much about cognitive behavioural therapy, and it may be that I misunderstand it, but it seems to me the focus of it is more on kind of trying to get rid of symptoms rather than really trying to understand. I'm sure, I know that there are some CBT practitioners that try and combine that with also a looking at what the sort of underlying drives are, but still the focus is being symptom-free. And I think that in the long term is almost likely to create more problems. It's like you've got a crack in your wall and you paper over it and you think, oh good, the wall looks nice and clean, but the crack's still there. And so similarly, let's say you get rid of your symptoms by programming your mind in various ways. And at times I've done that because, when you're really feeling very anxious, it can become a snowballing thing. Let's say you're very anxious, you play a concert, it doesn't go well because you're so anxious, and then you're more anxious for the next one. So there is a need sometimes to think that you have some strategies that help you get through it and that give you a chance to get back to a more even keel. So I talked about writing. I mean, the main thing about it is trying to settle into what the feeling is, which is very difficult, because somehow all our instincts seem to be, I mean, I've heard a lot of different people talk about this in various contexts, seem to be we desperately don't want to feel bad, and we want to push it away in any way, so it's actually very difficult for us to even feel properly what we're feeling without trying to make it go away. But this process of writing I find helpful is that I'm really trying to absolutely turn towards it and go inside myself, and as much as I can just to be curious, what actually does this feel like? And sometimes I find it doesn't feel quite as bad as I think it does. Or sometimes it might even be worse. Or it's often not quite what I think it's going to be. And it's that which is helpful, when you can get in touch with what you're feeling without trying to change it.
And when you have an attack of nerves on the stage, if you do have an attack of nerves on the stage, what do you then do in the moment to help yourself?
Yeah, I mean, that's something I've really got nothing helpful to say about, because it's not happened to me very often. When it has happened to me, I've really struggled. to know how to deal with it. It's about accessing a state of mind. So the reason that I'm not very keen on CBT methods is that it's like you're dealing with these things in your head and not finding this really embodied experience. And that it's the embodied experience of confidence, which is really helpful.
How do you keep your focus on stage?
I mean, assuming that I'm feeling basically relaxed, which is most of the time before a concert, it feels like going into a big playground, as if there's all this area to roam around in and it's going to be lovely. I suppose I have a very strong embodied sense of the music. I feel very full of the music, let's say. I think the music just carries you with it. If you're relaxed, then it happens naturally. I mean, it obviously depends on how you prepare. You know, you prepare well, you're physically prepared. Hopefully you love the music. You know, sometimes in careers you have to play pieces you're not very keen on, but it's much easier, I think, to keep this focus when you love what you're doing.
How do you prepare for a concert beforehand and the weeks leading up to the concert itself?
I mean, in the past few years, I've experimented quite a lot with how I practice and practicing slower and slower, and I found that becoming very helpful. I mean, that I'm learning things much quicker, and also that they physically feel more secure. I mean, the piano is particularly complex in terms of coordination, like your 10 fingers doing all kinds of opposing things at once. And I increasingly have found that the slower that I practice, the more I can solve all the tiny little problems. There might be thousands of technical problems in a single movement, and that each one needs to be isolated for it to feel nice. I suppose that's the thing that increasingly over the last years it feels nicer and nicer when I'm playing because I'm somehow solving more of those problems. So actually that's also very helpful for nerves in terms of, you know, this sort of link between your mind and your body. When your body's tense, you're much more susceptible to mental tension, and the other way around, being mentally tense, your body gets tense.
How do you prepare on the day of a concert?
You know, generally when I'm practicing anyway, I practice slow, but particularly on the day of a concert, I never practice up to speed. I always go just sort of gently touch everything and really slowly, so I feel the coordination well and feel really relaxed. 'Cause it strikes me that, you know, the very worst thing on the day of a concert is to check that you can still play these difficult things, and then, you know, it's such a ground for breeding paranoia because if it goes slightly wrong, so you check again, make sure, and then another thing goes slightly wrong, so you're sort of asking for anxiety to develop. So I just try and do everything I can to stay relaxed. Actually, something that I find really helpful, the piano I have at home is not actually a great piano. It's a very good kind of workhorse piano, but it's not beautiful. It's a little bit heavy in the action, and it's very nice for going different places to play concerts, and the piano I have is almost always better than what I have at home. So psychologically it's really nice. I guess, so on the day of a concert, yeah, just I try and be calm as much as I can, have a sleep in the afternoon, eat some pasta before for some energy, and really try and not in any way obsess about any detail of the concert. Really almost try and forget that I have a concert. Just have a really nice day and get into that kind of relaxed state of mind so that when I come to walk on stage it feels like something to be enjoyed. I mean, I'd say another aspect of it, which I think is really important, is that nerves, you know, my suspicion is, I know it's true for me, and my suspicion is that generally nerves don't come from nowhere. You know, they don't just suddenly appear on the day of a concert. But there's probably weeks of build-up to that. Maybe sort of subtly under the surface, as you practice it, there's this slight gnawing concern about that bit or that bit, and it strikes me as well that that's very important to be aware of, and to find a way of dealing with it. Like for me, it would be, yes, writing about it. So just noting, oh, that's rather paranoid. I know that I'm going to be able to work on that properly. But then when you practice, let's say there's some difficult bits, and every day you practice it, in the back of your mind there is this slight doubt. And so over the weeks you're ingraining this sense that when I come to this bit, I don't know if I can do it. So no wonder when you come to perform, you get to that bit and you think, oh God! So it's also really trying to not just practice physically, but practice this sort of open mental attitude where you're noticing these things as they arise and hopefully finding a way to settle them so you don't fixate on them. I mean, there was one time in my career that was very clear where I could see that process happening when I was able to change it, which was preparing for a recording of a Britain diversions for left-hand and orchestra. It's very hard, and it was a month before the recording and I was still trying to learn it, and there was some just horribly difficult bits, and I noticed day by day I was getting more and more stressed, fearing this terrible humiliation that was going to come when the recording's released. And at some point I remember stopping and thinking, this is really dumb, and firstly saying to myself, look, if this doesn't come out perfectly, all you can do is do your best. So that helped a little bit. But then as that stress dissipated, when I wasn't putting so much pressure on myself, suddenly I started finding all kinds of solutions to these difficult bits. And in the end, when it came to recording, I was just really excited to do it because I felt I'd found, let's say, solutions that were good enough that I felt really engaged in it. So, but for that to have happened, I needed that stepping back from the stress. It strikes me, I mean, I think it's happening more and more at music colleges that these kind of issues are being addressed. But I think that there almost can't be too much of it. I mean, again, because what you're doing when you're playing music is offering this emotional experience, and I think you need to see this emotional preparation as significant as the musical preparation, as the technical preparation. I mean, let's say you can have the most fantastic musical insight, but it can be as cold as stone. 95, 98% of this training is about music and technique, and as if that's really all you need, whereas maybe 50% is actually this, what you feel, with what's embodied. And yeah, like this question of empathy. I mean, you can't really hide what's going on inside yourself. And yeah, if you're closed, then it communicates itself. I think it's something I've not heard talked about very much, that this question of what is the relationship between the performer and the audience, and what is it you're doing on stage. And there's this mantra that's often said, like you should let the music speak for itself, and let the composer speak through you. And it's kind of a nonsense, really. I mean, the music can't speak without you. And the music is only going to say something meaningful if you're actually saying something that's meaningful to you. And so this sense of engagement and this openness to your own emotions, and actually more than that, this sense that you're communicating, not that you're imposing something on an audience, that you're, and particularly, and this is a really tricky issue for a lot of performers, that that you don't see yourself as special. You're the one on stage that everyone is looking at and admiring. And honestly, I think that's where a lot of the nerves come from. If you are this special person, then what if it goes wrong and they're all going to point and laugh? I don't know. You could say you're the same as the audience, or you're on the same level as them, and you're the one that's playing, and you're the one that's facilitating this shared experience, but you don't see it as being about you. And it's challenging. But to me, that's the crucial thing. I don't know, the thing that I really love, which I often feel when I'm playing, is a sense that the audience are listening, and that somehow what I'm doing is getting through in some way. You know, it's a tricky thing because it's you could say it's a very addictive experience. When you have the sense that you have power over the audience in that way, it can feel like power. Then you can feel how great you are that you're able to do this and captivate all these people. And there's like this constant siren song, I think. When I watch people perform, I feel that they are fantastic. I find it very alienating. Because I want them to tell me something personal. I mean, the whole thing is so complicated and so, you could almost kind of miraculous. How is it that in music there is this, we can have this shared experience? I mean, we might not hear exactly the same thing in music, but still, can you have this experience of a whole room full of people, like a big room full of people, so silent and sensing this thing that's in the air? How does it happen? What I want to hear from other people performing and what I want to do when I perform is to be absolutely taking part in that slightly miraculous thing, that quality that's in the air that means you have to listen to the next thing, like being told a bedtime story as a kid and what's going to happen.
What about the recording studio for nerves and stress? How do you find that?
I love recording now. When I started, I was very stressed because I had this thought that I wanted to make, particularly like your first record, and you feel like everything hinges on it. And so I wanted to make the best record I possibly could, and I worked extremely hard, like right up until 8 in the evening, the night before the recording started. So I recorded it, and then I listened back, and I was terribly disappointed. and I thought, oh no, it's not as I want, but you make do. I did that with another recording, the same thing happened, and gradually I realised that even if I was able to put down exactly what I wanted on the days of recording, when I heard it back a few months later, my ideas would have already changed somewhat, like sort of subtly shifted, so actually that I would never be happy in time. So that was helpful. The second thing that I found really helpful was an experience of listening back to the first edit of a CD and being very surprised, because I remembered my feeling in the recording session of being very engaged. And when I listened back, it sounded a bit cold. And so that always does happen to some extent. You don't get out as much as you put in, somehow, strangely. I don't know why. But it was particularly pronounced in this case. And so I asked the producer to send me the early takes from all of the tracks. I was curious, what was in there. And what I heard, I found, was less polished, but was much more engaged. And it was a real light bulb moment that what I had tended to do in recording sessions was to try and hone the character so it was precisely what I wanted. And I realised that by doing that, I was stripping it of actually the real feeling. So now I'm much more focused on just trying to find something spontaneous and visceral, and not to worry so much about the little things which aren't exactly what I want, but are worth keeping for the sake of this real expression. But actually, it's an interesting question, because for recording, well, you've got someone like Glenn Gould, who, for him, this fastidiousness and perfection of what he wanted to say, he was determined to capture. And you could say that for him, that worked wonderfully, as the recordings show. So I guess everyone has to find their place in that line. How much spontaneity do you want and how much control? And I think it's something that changes as you get older as well.
And how do you feel when it's all going really well on the concert platform?
Really fantastic, firstly. I mean, playing piano, the repertoire you have as a pianist is so astonishing. and to find music which amalgamates so many different emotions into these amazing structures is just an astonishing thing to be able to experience on stage, and to be able to experience with an audience if you sense that they are with you. It feels sort of like a miracle that something about the sort of human capacity for empathy is able to be contained in music. You know, a lot of people have written about trying to explain the power of music, and I don't think anyone's got remotely close to actually understanding the mechanism of it. You know, how is it that we feel these things? But I mean, equally, you could say that empathy is something of a miracle. You know, how is it that in a split second, as you see someone walk down the street, you can immediately understand a lot of things about them, you think. We have this capacity to recognise in a split second so much. It's amazing.
Steven Osborne, thank you very much. I've really enjoyed talking with you.
Thanks, you too.